Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. One of the most popular topics to discuss when it comes to Breath of the Wild and its sequel is the Zelda timeline. Most titles release with an official placement by Nintendo, and that's why much of Breath of the Wild's discussion revolves around where it fits. There's nothing in the game that gives players a definitive placement, and when addressed by Aonuma, he stated that restricting Breath of the Wild to a single timeline would eliminate the room for imagination. Even the website lists it in all splits, however, it's separate from the rest. To put it simply, where it fits in the Zelda series depends on the player's own interpretation. And that's exactly why YouTube is filled with videos outlining the many connections and references Breath of the Wild has to past games of the series. And in my opinion, the game with the most references has to be the first chronological title of the Zelda timeline, The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword. While this doesn't help at all with the timeline placement debate, as the game takes place in the unification part of the timeline, Nintendo's most recent trailer to the sequel of Breath of the Wild, combined with the fact that Skyward Sword HD was conveniently announced and released around the time of the E3 trailer, suggests that there will be more connections between both games. On top of what we see in the first game, the sequel to Breath of the Wild appears to be heavily inspired by Skyward Sword with the floating islands. And people are already coming up with interesting theories and ideas regarding what may happen in the game's story. Today we'll be compiling all of the Skyward Sword connections to both Breath of the Wild and its sequel. Some of these have already been talked about, but are worth going over again since the whole point of the video is looking at just how connected these titles truly are. And I am once again joined by Monster Maze. Stay tuned for his video in this collaboration. A link to that will be in the description below.
The trailer to the sequel of Breath of the Wild 2 introduces us to the floating islands. Islands that are floating. This is already a strong connection to Skyward Sword, given its story. The humans were sent to the sky by goddess Hylia after Demise and his army breached the surface as a means of protecting her people. This landmass was given the name SKYLOFT, and its residents lived peacefully above the barrier of cloud separating them from the dangers of the surface below. The sky acts as the game's explorable quote-unquote open world, much like the Wind Waker's Great Sea. Many smaller islands can be found while flying through the sky, and what is seen in Breath of the Wild 2 gives off similar vibes. Open areas with multiple floating islands. Some are closer to Hyrule's surface, while others are so high up that the clouds block the player's view of the lands below. One connection frequently brought up on this channel is Shamay's dialogue, where she believes that people used to live in the sky long ago. After fulfilling her request, Shamay wishes to visit the island in the sky by balloon, where she will ride a really big bird. Both of these are direct references to Skyward Sword's SKYLOFT. The humans sent to the sky by goddess Hylia are the ancestors of the ones living on the surface in the present, and the big birds mentioned by Shamay are referencing the loft wings used by the people of the sky to travel from island to island. Completing this side quest also rewards Link with a star fragment, a rare item that occasionally falls from the night sky. What's interesting is this item's similarity to the gratitude crystal, which is said to form when one is overwhelmed with feelings of gratitude. And the ones who created these items are the very same people who live in the sky, the same place where Breath of the Wild star fragments originate from. But this item also appears in Spirit Tracks and Triforce Heroes, so its connection to the gratitude crystal may be a coincidence. One could say that these floating islands described by Shamay come from her imagination, since she is a child, and that they have no correlation to what's seen in Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild sequel. However, Hyrule's children are known to see things that others can't, the best example being the three elemental spirits taking the forms of dragons. Volume 5 of the Rumor Mill states that there have been eyewitness accounts of dragons in the three regions of Lanayru, Akkala, and Farron, and that the ones making these claims are all children. As the player, we know that these sightings are legitimate, since Lanayru, Akkala, and Farron are the regions where Naydra, Dinral, and Farish appear. This makes Shamay's claims much more valid, since children are capable of seeing things that are invisible to others. Before the E3 trailer, these remarks were interpreted as mere references to Skyward Sword, but with the reveal of floating islands in the sequel, as well as the odd timing of Skyward Sword HD's announcement, one can only wonder if this wasn't a reference but foreshadowing of things to come. In fact, there is a chance that Loftwings will return to Breath of the Wild 2, since Shamay not only mentions the floating islands, but also riding really big birds. The way Link falls in the trailer is also nearly identical to Skyward Sword's dive, and this is only one of many connections between both games.
In fact, the three dragons of Breath of the Wild, Farash, Dinraal, and Naydra, get their names from the golden goddesses of the series: Farore, goddess of courage; Din, goddess of power; and Nehru, goddess of wisdom. Same goes for the names of some of Breath of the Wild's regions, specifically Farron, Eldin, and Lanayru. The elemental spirits are described as servants of goddess Hylia, watching over the sacred springs. One other game in the series features a trio of dragons tasked with assisting the goddess's chosen hero, as Skyward Sword has the regions of Farron, Eldin, and Lanayru, all protected by guardian spirits taking the form of dragons who share the same name. These deities hold verses of the Song of the Hero that, when learned, grant Link access to the Skykeep and its treasure, the Triforce. Breath of the Wild's dragons are much less relevant to the overall story, although it's possible that the sequel will change this. The first game introduced us to the Zonai tribe, a group who mysteriously vanished long ago. While we don't know much about them, what's seen at their ruins suggests that the Zonai were obsessed with dragons. One of the shots of the sequel's trailer shows the player holding a flamethrower item, with the same dragon head design found on the animal motifs. In our last video, we analyzed the Sky Ruins and suggested that these were built by a different group given the lack of Zonai features. However, there are some connections to dragons that can be made, as the strange robot in the trailer has claws similar to a dragon. It's clearly different in design compared to the ones of the Zonai tribe, but this being could be interpreted as a type of dragon. So if the Zonai were responsible for these ruins, it's likely a splitting of the tribe similar to the Sheikah. Another possibility regarding Breath of the Wild and its elemental spirits is that what's seen in the game foreshadows the events of the sequel. According to the Hyrule Compendium, these dragons ascend to the heavens as the sun begins to set. The player can watch as a portal opens up in the sky, closing shortly after the dragon flies through. It's very similar to the ones Link falls through to reach the surface in Skyward Sword. The cloud barrier was created by Hylia to separate the surface from the sky as a means of protecting her people, an impenetrable sea of clouds, only penetrated by the columns of light coming from the ancient tablets. However, this barrier is only clearly visible from above, as looking up from the surface shows a clear sky with few clouds. It's possible that this barrier still exists around the time of Breath of the Wild, and is why the floating islands have been hidden until now. It's never clear where the dragons are transported to, though given the fact that they're referred to as servants of the goddess, perhaps it's the same world seen in Skyward Sword, or even the Sacred Realm. With all the Skyward Sword references in the game, such as Zelda's speech in the first memory, it's possible that we as players will visit this mysterious realm, learning more about the history of Hyrule and the floating islands within the skies. Or you could learn more about how to stay safe when browsing the internet. Why? Because right now you can go to nordvpn.com/NintendoBC and use code NintendoBC to get a massive discount on a 2-year plan, plus a free bonus of 1 to 4 additional months. NordVPN helps keep your data encrypted when browsing online sites, protecting it from hackers, businesses, or that one salty kid that lost to you in a match of Smash Bros. Items off, Fox only, Final Destination, of course. Even if you're not a business, chances are you use the internet for everyday activities, watching Netflix, shopping on Amazon, or playing online games with friends. With over 5,400 servers in 59 different countries, it's very easy to switch to a different location. It also gives you access to certain websites or television shows that may be restricted in your country. And one NordVPN account allows you to connect up to 6 devices, whether it be your computer, smartphone, or new Super Nintendo 3DSi XL Pro Deluxe. Okay, maybe not that last one, but it does work with the Sheikah Slate. A lot of my time online is spent gathering resources or research for different videos, so having a VPN greatly helps with that process. It only takes a click to connect, and none of your data is shared since NordVPN has a strict no logs policy. Just go to the link below, nordvpn.com/NintendoBC, and use code NintendoBC for a huge discount on a 2-year plan, along with 1 to 4 additional months. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so now's the best time to try it out. That's nordvpn.com/NINTENDOBC.
While Skyward Sword is a much more linear-based experience with more of an emphasis on its story, Breath of the Wild is all about exploration and the open world. And because of this, the Kingdom of Hyrule is filled with all kinds of different structures and ruins, each telling their own stories, whether it be the technology built by the Sheikah, the enormous fossils located throughout the land, or the ruins associated with a tribe that perished long ago. Among these different structures are the ones built by the Hylians, some of them extremely old. Areas such as the Seal Temple and Lanayru Promenade are labeled as ancient Hylian ruins according to creating a champion. On some of the walls are carvings of Loftwings, the birds appearing in Skyward Sword. In fact, similar carvings are also found in that game, including another pattern as observed by Twitter user Mihama66. And many of the ancient Hylian columns from Breath of the Wild feature this symbol, the same one found within Skyward Sword's Faron region, as well as the Skyview Temple. 3 sacred springs can be found in Breath of the Wild, the springs of power, courage, and wisdom within Akkala, Faron, and Lanayru. Zelda travels to these springs as part of her training to awaken her power, similar to Skyward Sword Zelda, who cleanses herself in the waters of the Skyview and Earth Spring. It's believed that the sacred springs of both games are deeply connected, sharing the same features, including the goddess Hylia statues at the back. The Spring of Power in particular is nearly identical to the Skyview Spring in both layout and architecture. But there is another structure within Breath of the Wild that's often brought up when it comes to Skyward Sword connections and references: the Forgotten Temple found in Tanagar Canyon. According to the structural lead artist Manabo Takehara, this massive temple was constructed to keep a record of the heroes throughout Hyrule's history. It also states that the Guardians located here were meant to protect the facility, explaining the stationary ones scattered throughout the many rooms. At the end of the temple is a goddess statue of massive proportions, along with one of the many Sheikah shrines. And once Link has obtained all 120 spirit orbs, he's instructed to head towards the Forgotten Temple and given the Hero of the Wild clothes. While we don't know much about the Forgotten Temple, plenty of evidence suggests it to be the same location as the Seal Temple from Skyward Sword. By the end of the game, the goddess statue in SKYLOFT is sent back down to the surface, revealed to be the chunk of land sent skyward by Hylia long ago. It's possible that the statue in the Forgotten Temple is the very same one, backed up by what's written in the adventure log, as it states that this goddess statue is the oldest. Only 2 of Skyward Sword statues share a similar size, one inside the Isle of the Song and the other being in SKYLOFT. Chances are that the latter is the one referenced in the adventure log, the Forgotten Temple being the remains of the Sealed Temple, a sacred site long forgotten by the people of Hyrule. Like the promenade, carvings of Loftwings are present on the architecture, along with 8 stone pillars lining the path, similar to the Sealed Temple. A tree is seen popping out of the ruins' left wall, perhaps the same one planted by the hero in Skyward Sword. Zeltic made a whole video on the subject, so a link to that will be down below in case you're interested in learning more.
The Forgotten Temple and Sacred Springs aren't the only locations with goddess statues, as the Temple of Time and settlements found across Hyrule also hold this structure. Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild are the only games in the series which use a statue, making the connection all the more interesting. Within Hyrule Castle is a strange design above the throne room. It's a 4-line staff with musical notes referencing Zelda's lullaby from Ocarina of Time. But something that many people don't know is that this pattern is found elsewhere, because Skyward Sword's Gate of Time features the same design. Perhaps Breath of the Wild's architecture holds even more references and connections to Skyward Sword that haven't yet been discovered. And with ruins such as the Sacred Springs and Forgotten Temple, there may be more to come with the game's sequel. Following Hylia's battle with Demise, she forged the Goddess Sword, along with Fi, a humanoid spirit residing in the blade that would assist the hero on his quest. Once Link fulfills his role as Hylia's chosen hero and seals away Demise, he places the Master Sword back in its pedestal, saying his goodbyes to Fi as she returns within the blade. While bittersweet, she hopes that one day the two will be reunited, perhaps in another life. Fi is referenced on multiple occasions in Breath of the Wild. In the second memory, Zelda states that according to legend, an ancient voice resonates inside the blade. The Master Sword speaks to Zelda after Link collapses from his injuries, and it's implied that Fi was the one who told the princess to take him to the Shrine of Resurrection, later brought up in Zelda's conversation with the Deku Tree. After Link defeats Calamity Ganon and frees the princess from her 100-year struggle, she goes on to say that she can no longer hear the voice inside the Master Sword. The blade will glow a second time after the hero completes the Trial of the Sword, again playing Fi's sound effect heard in Skyward Sword. Whether Fi will reappear or not is up for debate, though since she's directly tied to the Master Sword, it's possible. And, of course, there's Levias. Referred to as the Great Spirit and Guardian of the Skies, Levias holds one of the 4 verses to the Song of the Hero, the key to locating the Triforce. And of the 3 Leviathan bones found within Breath of the Wild, one of them is likely to be the same spirit. It has the same overall shape, and on top of its head is a dent close to the spot where Link fights Bilokite, the parasite that possessed Levias in Skyward Sword. Concept art of the Leviathans is found on page 344 of Creating a Champion, and the first one appears to be of the Elden skeleton. The limbs aren't seen on the in-game fossil, however they're likely buried beneath the ground. The same crater shape on Levias' head is also visible on the drawing, more evidence pointing towards these bones once belonging to the Great Spirit. Since Levias lived above the cloud barrier, theorized to still exist at the time of Breath of the Wild, it may even explain the giant fossils scattered all across Hyrule. Perhaps these creatures lived not on the land, but high above the clouds, or even the realm that the dragons travel to. Of course, there are many other character references in the game, especially the names of the different locations across Hyrule, but these connections are much more abundant and span across multiple games. The Breach of Demise being the most interesting of the bunch, as its name clearly is inspired by the events taking place pre-Skyward Sword. It's unclear whether this location is the place the demon army emerged from, or if it was simply named due to its appearance. It's not too surprising that the game most often referenced in Breath of the Wild is Skyward Sword. Aside from the fact that the game happens in all 3 timelines, from a development point of view, it makes sense. And to explain why, we must first talk about a certain individual by the name of Hidemaru Fujibayashi. Starting out as a person who presented game concepts thought up by the staff to producer Shigeru Miyamoto, Fujibayashi soon became the sub-director and story writer for Phantom Hourglass. He was also the one who directed the Minish Cap while at Capcom. Eventually, he became the director for The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, as well as a little game called, you may have heard about it, Breath of the Wild. And when you have the same person direct 2 games of the same series, it's not too surprising to see all those references scattered throughout the story and world. Especially since Skyward Sword is such an important title in the franchise as it explains core parts of the story such as the Master Sword and the Curse of the Demon Tribe. In fact, some of Breath of the Wild's official artwork is eerily similar to Skyward Sword's. Again, this makes sense as both games were directed by the same individual. And if Breath of the Wild was filled with so many references and connections to this past game, what's to say that the same won't happen with its sequel? The shot of Hyrule Castle floating above a pit with Malice seeping out is similar to Ocarina of Time, but it also reminds me of Skyward Sword. A part of SKYLOFT comes back down to the surface, eradicating Demise in the present, and the dark misty substance coming from the seal as it weakens is similar to the dark chamber underground where Ganondorf is held, the source of the malice beneath the now floating Hyrule Castle. It's like what we see in Skyward Sword, now in reverse. Instead of destroying this ancient evil, it has now unleashed it onto the world. So, what does this mean for Breath of the Wild 2? Since Fujibayashi is again the director, it's very likely that this game will continue to have connections and references to Skyward Sword. The sequel's clearly inspired by that game, given the floating islands, plus the oddly convenient timing of Skyward Sword's announcement and release, and all of the already existing references in the first game. Since Skyward Sword was such an important game for the series, it would be strange if this game didn't acknowledge its events and/or characters. And when you think about it, this is the first time Ganondorf will be making an appearance with players knowing about Demise and the Demon Tribe's curse. All other games where Ganondorf appears, Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, all happened before Skyward Sword's inception. Yes, it could be a coincidence, but all the evidence suggests otherwise. Hopefully we'll get more news on the game later this year, but in the meantime, I thank you all for watching this video. I know that my upload schedule has been very inconsistent recently, and I apologize for that. I'll try to get back to working on videos more frequently. I got a couple others planned for the sequel, and I hope to upload some Skyward Sword content as well. Special thanks to Monster Maze for joining me on this one. You'll find a link to his part of the collaboration down below, and the usual links to Patreon, Discord, and Twitter. I've been NintendoBlackCrisis, and I'll see you all next time.